The 3-minute exercise is a very convenient, useful, efficient way of identifying your emotional problems and what you're telling yourself to create them, and to reevaluate what you're telling yourself, question it, challenge it, and contradict it, and then internalize a new way of looking at things so you don't create emotional problems for yourself. The form goes from A to F, and normally we start with C. C stands for undesirable emotional or behavioral consequences, which means the psychological problem you have that you'd like to overcome. For example, let's suppose you feel very hurt and you eat compulsively along with that. So that would be C, hurt and compulsive eating. And then you think back to what happened right before I felt hurt and started to eat compulsively. And you realize your partner criticized you. So at A, the activating event, the adversity, the situation which came right before you felt hurt and you ate compulsively, you would write, I was criticized by my partner. Now, as we know, A doesn't cause C. It's not criticism or any other problem in your life that causes you to have an emotional response, but rather it's what you tell yourself. And if your emotional behavioral response is self-defeating, then the irrational belief consists of a demand, a must, a should, a supposed to, a have to, a demand you put on yourself, others, or situations. In this case, you might have been telling yourself, I absolutely must not be criticized. I'm a horrible person. So usually irrational beliefs start with a demand, a must, and they end with a global rating such as I'm no good, I'm a failure, I'm a horrible person. So we've come up with A, B, and C. A, you were criticized by your partner. B, I must not be criticized, I'm a horrible person. And C, you feel hurt and you compulsively eat. Now notice that although we're calling B an irrational belief, actually it's very rational, as very reasonable as a preference. So if you only told yourself, I strongly prefer not to be criticized, I passionately desire to be praised rather than criticized, that's okay. We all like praise and approval rather than criticism. So that's a reasonable preference. But when we take our reasonable preferences and we escalate them into demands, musts and shoulds, absolutes, that's when we get ourselves into trouble and cause our psychological problems. And you can see that very clearly in the A, B, C model. Then the question is, since your preference is fine to not be criticized, but the must about it is a problem, how can you keep your preference to be approved of and loved, but get rid of the musty thinking? The answer is go on to D. D stands for disputing or questioning your irrational belief at B. And that's a simple process. You just take what you wrote at B and you put why or what is the evidence in front of it. What is the evidence? I absolutely must never be criticized by my partner. So that's a very good question, and it leads us to think and look for the evidence. Is there any evidence for the must, for the absolute? Is there a law of the universe, statute in the Constitution that says you must never be criticized by your partner? And the answer that you come up with, you put it E, effective new thinking, or the answer to the question. And if you think about it, you won't find any evidence for the must, so you could write that down at E. Although I strongly prefer not to be criticized by my partner, there's no reason or law saying I absolutely must never be criticized. It is very disappointing when my partner criticizes me, but hardly the end of the universe. I've been criticized before and I survived, and I'll survive criticism in the future. I don't like being criticized at all, but I definitely can stand what I don't like. When my partner criticizes me, all this proves about my self-worth, at the very worst, is that I'm an imperfect human who acts imperfectly, who isn't always loved and approved of, never a rotten or horrible person. It's not the criticism of my partner that makes me feel hurt or forces me to eat compulsively, but rather it's my unrealistic thinking, my irrational beliefs, my musts and shoulds about that causes my hurt, and I can change my thinking. Learning to accept myself unconditionally, whether my partner approves of me or not, is a lesson that will benefit me for the rest of my life. I can still have a happy life and a fulfilling relationship with my partner, even with criticism, although I would probably be happier if my partner never criticized me and always approved of me, which of course is impossible. So those are some of the reasonable statements, rational statements you can write at E, effective new thinking, that contradicts your irrational belief. And then once you internalize that, then that will lead to F, your new feeling and behavior, which would be still a negative feeling because you don't like being criticized, but an appropriate, a helpful negative feeling, such as great disappointment, displeasure, discomfort about the criticism, and controlled eating rather than compulsive eating in the face of criticism. Now, the final point here is, how do you internalize what you wrote at E? And the answer is by using the same learning process we use to learn most things. Reinforcement is the royal road to learning. The more we practice, reinforce, repeat, review, more rational thinking, a better perspective on ourselves and life, the more we internalize it, just like learning anything else. Practice makes near perfect. So you would write out these 3-minute exercises once a day, twice a day, 10,000 times a day. The more, the better. The sooner you'll build new pathways in your brain and develop a new philosophy, a philosophy of unconditional self-acceptance rather than self-criticism.